The morning of December 21st, 1992 should have been like any other for Christy Mirack. At 25 years old, she was a young, vibrant 6th grade teacher at Rohrerstown Elementary School in East Lampeter Township, Pennsylvania. She had always been punctual, dedicated, and full of life, the kind of teacher who never missed a day unless absolutely necessary. Her students adored her. Her colleagues admired her. But on this morning, something wasn't right. As the minutes passed, then the hours, she never arrived. The phone in the school office remained silent. No call, no excuse, nothing. This was completely out of character for Christy. Had she overslept? Had she fallen ill? Or was something more sinister at play? At first, it was just a concern, but soon it became dread. By late morning, Principal Harry Goodman couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping in. Christy wasn't answering calls. He made a decision, one that would change everything. He would drive to her apartment. He had to check on her. But when he arrived, what he found was the start of a nightmare that would haunt the town for decades. Christie's apartment was in Greenfield Estates, a quiet, seemingly safe place where nothing like this was supposed to happen. As Principal Harry Goodman approached the door, he immediately noticed something was wrong. The front door was slightly open. Did Christie leave it unlocked? Had someone forced their way in? With hesitation and growing fear, he stepped inside. And there, in the living room, he froze. Christy Mirack lay on the floor, motionless, lifeless. Her body was battered, her face swollen, and the scene told a story of pure violence. She had been brutally beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled. Her clothes were partially removed, a horrifying indicator of the nature of the attack. But what was even more chilling was her coat and gloves. She had been dressed for work. Had she been attacked just as she was about to leave? The room showed clear signs of a struggle. Objects knocked over, furniture shifted, evidence of a fight for survival. Principal Goodman stumbled back, shaken to his core. He ran to call the police. Christy Mirack's life had been stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. But why and who could have done this? The police needed answers. Fast. Within minutes, law enforcement swarmed the scene. The crime scene told a terrifying story. Christy was still fully clothed, a coat, gloves, even her shoes. This suggested something critical. She had been ready to leave, maybe even heading toward the door when the killer struck. A wooden cutting board, splintered and broken, lay nearby. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a sign of uncontrollable rage. Someone had grabbed it in the heat of the moment and used it viciously. This was not a simple burglary gone wrong. It was personal, calculated, brutal. Had Christy known her killer? Had they been watching her? Or was this a random act of unspeakable violence? Investigators searched for clues, but there was one piece of evidence they knew could be their key to solving this case: DNA. The attacker had left something behind. Was this the break detectives needed? Or would Christie's case go cold, like so many others before it? The murder of Christy Mirack was shocking, violent, and seemingly without motive. Who could have done this? Investigators wasted no time. They worked around the clock, interviewing family, friends, co-workers, and neighbors. They asked the most pressing questions. Was Christy being stalked? Had she recently broken off a relationship? Was there a jealous ex? Was this a burglary gone wrong? But nothing made sense. There was no sign of forced entry. There was no sign of theft. Her purse, valuables, and car were untouched. Whoever had done this hadn't come to steal, they had come to kill. But why? Detectives knew one thing for certain. Christy had fought back hard. There were clear signs of a violent struggle. she had tried to escape. And in the chaos, the killer left something behind: DNA. At the time, DNA was still an emerging forensic tool, but it was enough to rule out initial suspects. One by one, every person close to Christy was tested. No match. The killer was nowhere in the system. The case hit a wall. And as days turned into weeks, months, years, it seemed Christie's killer had disappeared into the shadows. The leads dried up. The police had exhausted every avenue. The DNA, a dead end, at least for now. And so, Christie's murder became a cold case. Her family waited for answers that never came. Imagine that pain. Imagine knowing the killer is still out there, living their life untouched by justice. Every few years, detectives would revisit the case, hoping for a new lead. But there was nothing. Time was not on their side. And as the world moved forward, Christie's case slipped into silence. Would the murderer ever be found? Or was this case doomed to remain a mystery forever? Fast forward to 2018, 26 years later. Forensic science had changed dramatically. A new tool was revolutionizing cold case investigations: genetic genealogy. But what exactly is genetic genealogy? Think about those ancestry DNA kits, the ones people send in to learn about their heritage. Well, now investigators were using those same databases to track down criminals. Here's how it works. A DNA sample from a crime scene is uploaded to a public genealogy database. The system scans for relatives, not the killer directly, but distant family members. From there, detectives build a family tree to track down the unknown suspect. Sounds incredible, right? This groundbreaking method had already solved several decades-old murders. Could it finally bring justice to Christy Mirack? Detectives had one shot. They uploaded the DNA. And what they found changed everything. Detectives had one last hope: Paraben Nanolabs, a pioneering forensic DNA company that specialized in genetic genealogy. They had already cracked multiple cold cases using a single method, tracing the family tree of an unknown suspect using DNA from the crime scene. Would it work here? Detectives uploaded the crime scene DNA into public genealogy databases like GEDmatch, a system used by thousands of people hoping to learn about their ancestry. And then a hit, not the killer, but a relative. A distant cousin, someone completely unaware that their DNA was about to expose a murderer. Now, detectives had a starting point. By using genealogical research, forensic scientists at Paraben Nanolabs meticulously worked backward, connecting family lines, birth records, and generations of relatives. Piece by piece, the tree narrowed, branch after branch, name after name, until it led to one man, a man who had never been a suspect, a man who had been hiding in plain sight for 26 years. A man named Raymond Rowe. Raymond Rowe was not the kind of man anyone expected to be a cold-blooded killer. To most people, he was simply DJ Freez, a well-known, well-liked, charismatic entertainer in Pennsylvania. He had spent years performing at weddings, clubs, and major events. He had a reputation as a fun, energetic, beloved local celebrity. But beneath the stage lights was something darker, something nobody saw coming. The DNA didn't lie. Rowe had no documented connection to Christy Mirack, no past disputes, no romantic link, no known interactions. So, how did he end up being her killer? Had he been watching her? Was this a crime of opportunity, a random attack, a secret obsession? The police needed answers. But DNA alone wasn't enough for an arrest. They needed concrete proof, something undeniable. And to get it, they would have to get close to Raymond Rowe without him knowing. Detectives had a problem. How do you collect DNA from someone without them knowing? If Rowe had any suspicion that the police were onto him, he could destroy any evidence, refuse testing, or even flee. They had to be smart, careful, precise. And then an idea formed. They tracked Rowe's upcoming schedule and found the perfect opportunity. He was scheduled to DJ a major event, a packed venue, loud music, crowds, and in that crowd, undercover detectives. They posed as fans. They blended in, acting casual, observant, waiting for one crucial mistake. All they needed was for Raymond Rowe to slip up, for him to leave something behind. A fingerprint, a napkin, a glass, or maybe something even better. The venue was packed. The music was loud, the atmosphere electric. Raymond Rowe DJ Freez stood behind his turntables doing what he had done for years. He had no idea that among the crowd, detectives were watching his every move. For hours, they waited. He laughed, performed, interacted with fans. He was completely unaware that his past was finally catching up with him. And then it happened. In the middle of his set, he reached for a piece of gum. He chewed it absent-mindedly like it was nothing. Then, without a second thought, he spit it out onto a napkin and left it on the table. Detectives didn't hesitate. The second he walked away, they swooped in. The gum, the napkin, and then a used water bottle. This was it. This was the moment that could crack the case wide open. All they needed was one test, and if the DNA matched the crime scene, it would mean that after 26 years, Christy Mirack's murderer was finally caught. Days passed. Forensics worked quickly. The chewed gum and water bottle were sent for analysis. The team held their breath, waiting for results, and then confirmation. The DNA from Raymond Rowe's gum was an exact match to the DNA found at Christy Mirack's crime scene. There was no mistake, no doubt. They had him. After 2.5 decades, the police had their answer. But the biggest question remained. Why? What had driven Raymond Rowe, a man with no known connection to Christy, no criminal history, no record of violence, to commit such a brutal murder? Had he done this before? Was Christy the only victim or just the only one they found? The only way to find out was to bring him in. June 25th, 2018. After 26 years of walking free, Raymond Rowe had no idea his time was up. Detectives arrived at his home. This wasn't a random visit. This wasn't a questioning session. This was an arrest. Rowe opened the door, and within seconds, the handcuffs were on his wrists. He was told the charges: first-degree murder, rape, burglary. The community was stunned. People who had danced at his events, people who had hired him for their weddings. Could this really be the same man who had violently murdered Christy Mirack? How had he lived a normal life all these years? For decades, Rowe had performed, laughed, built friendships, and stood in front of crowds, all while carrying a horrifying secret. Now his double life was over, but the biggest mystery remained. Would he confess, or would he take his secrets to the grave? After his shocking arrest, Raymond Rowe sat in the interrogation room, facing the detectives who had finally caught him. This was his chance to explain himself, to answer the one question that haunted everyone. Why? Why did he kill Christy Mirack? Was she a random target, or had he been watching her? Had they crossed paths before, or was this a crime of pure opportunity? With DNA evidence stacked against him, Rowe had nowhere to hide. The detectives pressed him for answers. Why did you do it? Did you know Christy? Was this planned? But Rowe refused to talk. His only response: I don't have anything to say. That was it. No denial, no explanation, no remorse, nothing. He sat stone-faced, offering zero insight into his crime. And so, the biggest question of all remains unanswered. Why did Raymond Rowe kill Christy Mirack? To this day, we still don't know. With overwhelming DNA evidence, prosecutors built their case. And yet, Rowe still refused to speak. No motive, no confession, no answers. But in the eyes of the law, it didn't matter. The DNA proved everything. When the case went to court, the jury didn't need much convincing. Rowe's attorney knew fighting the evidence was impossible. So instead of going to trial, Raymond Rowe did the only thing left. He pleaded guilty. It was over. After 26 years, Christy Mirack's murderer was finally held accountable. But for her family, there was no closure, because Rowe never explained why. Would they ever know the truth? Or would the reason for Christy's murder die with him? On January 8, 2019, Raymond Rowe stood in a Lancaster County courtroom waiting to hear his fate. His sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. An additional 60 to 120 years for related charges. He would never walk free again. Justice had been served, but was it enough? Christy's family sat in the courtroom, grappling with the weight of it all. Yes, Rowe was behind bars, but the pain never goes away. They would never hear Christy's voice again, never see her smile, never watch her fulfill the future she deserved. And the biggest wound of all, they still had no answers. To this day, Raymond Rowe has never explained why he did it. And maybe he never will. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the final sentence. For 26 years, Christy Mirack's family had lived with unimaginable grief, waiting, hoping, and fearing that the truth would never come. And now, they had an answer. They had justice, but it didn't bring peace. As Rose stood there, emotionless, Christy's mother and brother wept. Her brother, Vincent Mirack, stood before the court and spoke with raw pain in his voice. This has destroyed my family, my mother, my father, and you sit there and say nothing. Even now, even after everything, Rowe offered no explanation. The biggest question of all remained unanswered. Why did he choose Christy? Was it planned or random? Had he been watching her? It was impossible to accept that someone could steal Christy's life so violently, so brutally, and never say why. Rowe had been sentenced. He would never hurt anyone again. But for Christy's family, justice didn't erase the pain. Nothing ever would. Christy's case was more than just a conviction. It was a turning point in forensic science. Before this, DNA alone couldn't solve a case unless the suspect was already in the system. But with genetic genealogy, investigators could track down criminals who had never been caught before. Christy's case was one of the first high-profile cold cases solved this way. And after 26 years of dead ends, it took only a few weeks of genetic tracing to identify Raymond Rowe. This was a breakthrough. It proved that science could catch killers, even decades later. But it also raised serious questions. Would this technology always be used for good? Or could it be abused? Genetic genealogy was a powerful tool, but not everyone saw it as a victory. Privacy advocates raised concerns. Should law enforcement have access to private DNA databases? What if innocent family members were exposed in a criminal investigation? Could this lead to wrongful arrests? The debate grew louder as more cases were solved this way. For families of victims, genetic genealogy was a miracle away to finally get justice. But for civil rights groups, it was a potential violation of privacy. Where should the line be drawn? At what point does the pursuit of justice become a threat to personal freedom? It's a question that remains unanswered. But one thing is clear: genetic genealogy changed crime solving forever. Since Christy Mirack's case, dozens of other cold cases have been solved using genetic genealogy. The Golden State Killer, a notorious serial murderer who had evaded capture for over 40 years, was caught in 2018 through the same method. The murder of Carla Walker, a Texas teen killed in 1974, was solved in 2020 using genealogy tracing. The 1988 murder of April Tinsley, a horrific case that haunted Indiana for decades, was solved in 2018 through DNA matching. One by one, killers who had thought they got away with murder were being exposed. And the more technology advanced, the more dangerous DNA became for criminals. So, how many more will be caught? How many cold cases from decades past will suddenly have new answers? And more importantly, how many killers are still out there waiting for the day their DNA finally gives them away? For Christy Mirack's family, justice finally arrived. But one question will always haunt them. Why? Why did Raymond Rowe do it? Was it a premeditated attack? A crime of passion? A random act of violence? Or was he a serial predator, someone who had done this before, but only got caught once? Did Christy fight the only battle he ever lost? Or are there other victims we don't know about? To this day, we still don't have answers. And maybe we never will. The only thing we know for sure: Raymond Rowe spent 26 years hiding in plain sight. And in the end, it took one piece of chewed gum to bring him down.